Rodríguez is a legend in the world of international law enforcement, fighting against organized crime. Chris Feistl, who served with distinction 26 years in the Drug Enforcement Administration, retiring in 2014 as an assistant special agent in charge of the Phoenix Field Division. After an impactful start in Miami, Chris was deployed to Colombia in 1994 at a turning point in the global drug war. Handpicked for a special DEA task force targeting the Cali Cartel, a criminal empire once called the most powerful organization in the history by former DEA Chief Robert Bonner. Chris joined partner Dave Mitchell on a mission that will change history. Over nearly 3 years, their work led to the arrest of the notorious Cali Godfathers and the ultimate dismantle of the biggest drug cartel the world has ever seen. Chris' expertise don't end there. Across a 12-year venture in Colombia, one of the longest ever served by a DEA agent in the country, he directed groundbreaking investigation into cartels like Cali and Norte del Valle, as well as terrorist organizations such as the AUC and the FARC. It's no wonder Chris became a sought-after voice for major documentaries from Netflix Narcos, Rise of a New Empire, and Drug Lords, to National Geographic Narco Wars, as well as appearances on NPR, This is American Life, and top podcasts like Armchair Expert and Game of Crimes. His real-life pursuit of justice has been dramatized on screen, but today Chris brings us a first-hand account straight from the lines of fire, honored with the DEA Administration Award of Honor and multiple commendations from both U.S. intelligence and Colombian government. Chris doesn't just know the story, he lived every moment. His experience as a consultant for Narcos and his best-selling book, After Escobar, give us an insider window into the turbulent, dangerous, and sometimes surprising battle to dismantle a criminal empire that once controlled 85% of the world's cocaine supply. Chris' Amazon best-selling book, After Escobar, gives a true crime fans and history buffs an inside look of what really meant to challenge an empire built on corruption, violence, and billions of dollars. Today's episode goes further than the headlines and Hollywood scripts. Chris will share what it felt like to be an American agent in Colombia, facing cartel assassins, outmaneuvering corruption, foreign loyal partnerships, and witnessing moments of resilience, heartbreak, and triumph. This is the real story of how perseverance and integrity help bring down seemingly untouchable forces, and why those lessons will matter today. And welcome, Chris, to this episode of Equalizer. I really appreciate you taking some time to be with us today.
Thank you, William. It's great to be with you.
What first inspired you to join the Drug Enforcement Administration, and what were your expectations starting out in Miami?
Well, it's kind of a long story. When I was a junior in college, the summer of my junior year, I got a part-time job as a summer or a special police officer down in Wildwood, New Jersey. And while I was there, I kind of parlayed that into an internship for college. And while I was working with the police department there, I had a chance to work undercover. And I met a girl in a bar who offered to sell me methamphetamine, and we set up an undercover deal. And that really piqued my interest kind of in law enforcement, because at that time I had planned on going to law school to be an attorney, kind of like a sports agent. So I really law enforcement wasn't on my map, but that undercover experience kind of put the light on the law enforcement career for me. And I started looking into a variety of different federal agencies, DEA, FBI, CIA. And I after that, I worked in Virginia Beach as a police officer. And at that time, I applied to DEA and I got hired by DEA in 1988. So my expectations were, you know, what I kind of saw on television, right? It was the age of Miami Vice. You know, Miami was on the scene. So I thought, man, this is like a pretty cool job. I can do some pretty good undercover work. I can work federally. So I really didn't have a whole lot of expectations, and I only kind of knew what I saw on television.
How did the Miami drug scene of the late 80s and early 90s shape your views on the international narcotic networks?
Well, you know, in the late 80s, even in the mid 80s, early 90s, we always had a saying that cocaine was falling out of the sky. And literally it was, because of all the air activity that was going on there. So it was a very great place to learn the job. We were always very busy. And it made you sit back and realize the amount of drugs that were actually coming into the country and how much of these Colombian drug cartels, how much they were making. You know, millions and upon millions, if not even billions of dollars back then. So it was kind of an eye-opening experience to see how much of that cocaine was actually coming into the United States. But that was working in Miami was what also put me on the path to working overseas in the foreign arena in Colombia.
Can you describe your most formative early cases as a young agent before being assigned to Colombia?
Sure. So in Miami, as we said, that was kind of a melting pot. You had all kind of drugs that were coming into the country in Miami. You had a lot of marijuana. You had a lot of Colombian cocaine. You even had quite a bit of heroin coming in from East Africa or West Africa. I'm sorry. So it was just your normal everyday cases, right? You were working cocaine by bus, you know, 5, 10, 15, 20 kilos. I did a lot of maritime smuggling investigations, right? It's where we posed as a transportation crew that had access to coastal freighters as well as go-fast boats. And we would use those vessels to bring in large quantities of cocaine, you know, several thousand kilos sometimes at a time from Colombia. So my niche, so to say, was kind of those maritime smuggling investigations, but you were exposed pretty much to every kind of investigation in Florida at that time. Wiretaps, clandestine laboratories, and you know, some street level cases as well. So it was a great place to learn the job, and it was a very busy place during that time.
Did the training at the DEA Academy prepare you or not prepare you for what you were to face overseas in Colombia?
Well, I don't know if there's any amount of training that could really prepare you for what you're facing when you work in the foreign environment, especially in countries such as Mexico or Colombia back in the day, because it was an entirely different environment. The corruption was one of probably the biggest obstacle that we had to deal with. So in the United States, when you're working investigations, you're working with different police departments, you're working with different federal agencies, you're not really concerning yourself with that level of corruption. Obviously, there is some corruption that exists, but not to that extent. So going over there, operating in different environments, sometimes even operating in the jungle, depending on what types of investigations that you were doing, trying to deal with that corruption, the security that you had to always worry about there because of the cartels. I don't know if there's any amount of training that can really prepare you for that. That's kind of, you get on the ground and you need to learn and you need to figure it out pretty quickly while you're there.
What sort of a special training or briefings did you receive specifically to go to Colombia? Any language training, D-Lab Institute, or anything to prepare you for an assignment in Colombia?
So DEA, they have evolved their training over the last 30 years since I was there. They have now all of these foreign orientation programs. They have escape and evasion training. They have a variety of different programs. But back when I went overseas, they didn't have a lot of that stuff. But we did have to go to language school, right? So it was a requirement that any agent who was working overseas, no matter what country they went to, they had to go to language school. So if you were going to Mexico, you had to go to learn Spanish in Mexico. Obviously in Colombia, you had to learn Spanish as well. If you're going to Thailand, you had to learn Thai. So they did send you to school depending on the language you were learning. That school went from anywhere from a few months to 8 or 10 months, depending on the complexity or the language that you were learning. So yes, that was a requirement for everybody to attend language school and to pass a written or a verbal language test before you actually deployed to that country.
Were you already aware of the Cali cartel's reputation before arriving in country?
Yes, because in Miami, because of the investigations that we worked, especially those maritime investigations, we dealt with a lot of investigations that were tied back to the Cali and to the Medellin cartel. So me and my partner, Dave Mitchell, who I ended up working with in Colombia, we had a very good idea of who the Cali cartel was, what their hierarchy was, how they functioned, where they had their strategic offices, so to say, in the United States and other foreign countries. So yeah, we had a pretty good idea of exactly what we were dealing with before we went down there.
The difference between the Medellin cartel and the Cali cartel is that a lot of the members of the Cali cartel in different ranks, or in the structure, in the leadership, were former Colombian police officers. And a lot of people don't know that within the cartel, you had former members of the security forces of Colombia, whether it was police, military, and all of that. And one of them was a guy by the name of Fomeke. Victor Julio Patiño Fomeke was a former policeman that turned logistic chief and supervised the cocaine production and shipments. Later on in his career, he jumped to the other side of the ship. You also had Wilber Elidio Varela Fajardo, aka Jabon, that was a hitman for the Cali cartel, and he was a police officer before joining forces in the Cali cartel, and later on became a boss within the Norte del Valle cartel. Then you had Orlando Henao Montoya, that was one of the bosses in the Norte del Valle cartel. Started out in the Cali cartel and then was also a member of the Colombian National Police. The Cali cartel was known as the KGB of Latin America. Their organization and their security apparatus, they knew when somebody arrived at the airports. They knew when there were operations going on, because they had infiltrated a lot of the agencies within the Colombian government. Is that your take?
Oh, without a doubt. They were certainly known as the Cali KGB, and they earned that reputation because of exactly what you described on how they went about their security network, how they developed their intelligence and communications network. They had a stranglehold on the city of Cali. So nothing came into Cali, nothing came out of Cali, and nothing moved around in Cali without them knowing about it. And you can go back in history and you could look at some of the things that were seized and some of the intelligence that was developed against the Cali KGB. Back in the late 80s, when the Cali cartel was at war with the Medellin cartel, they purchased an IBM AS400 mainframe computer. It was about 6 feet high, maybe 3 or 4 feet wide, and it had an incalculable amount of storage. And when the military actually seized that computer, they found an incredible cache of intelligence that really put a spotlight on how advanced the Cali cartel was and just how sophisticated they were. To give you an example, they had the entire motor vehicle division for Colombia inside that computer. So if they saw a suspicious vehicle outside, they were able to get into that computer, run the license plate, and get the ownership information to see who it came back to. Then they would check that name in their intelligence databases to see if it was in any way, shape, or form related to any Medellin operatives during that war. They also had the telephone directory, the entire telephone directory of Cali and as well as Colombia. So if you were suspected, William, of being an informant for the Medellin cartel or someone else, they were able to put in your telephone number into that computer. They were able to do cross checks to see who you were calling. And then they had the capability, which is really incredible at the time, to wiretap almost 400 to 500 telephones a month in Colombia. Now, at that time, that was probably more than most governments throughout the world could wiretap. So they were extremely sophisticated, which made our job going after the Cali cartel much, much more difficult. And just to expand on the one thing that you said, a lot of those names that you brought up were more so associated to the North Valle cartel, but the Cali cartel employed a lot of their security members, a lot of their intelligence members were all ex-police or ex-military, because they really wanted that experience that they had developed while they were serving in the Colombian security forces.
Yeah, you had guys like Jorge Eduardo Rojas Cruz, K6, Carlos Espinosa, and Jorge Salcedo were their main security advisors, and they kept a tight rein on all the information coming in and out, and they are the ones that had the connections within the other services to be able to manipulate and get the information that they needed against their enemies.
Correct. Carlos Espinosa he worked at the phone company in Cali, and through him, the Cali cartel was able to wiretap all of those telephones. So he was like their communications guru. Jorge Salcedo was a Army reservist. He was a captain in the Army Reserves. He was a counterintelligence, communications, weapons, force protection expert, and he ended up being the head of security for the Cali cartel. So they employed many ex-military and/or police officials to specifically go into those roles as security, communications, force protection, as well as counterintelligence.
You guys were able to work with some of the people from the Bloque de Búsqueda that went after Pablo. People like Hugo Martinez, Edgar Barragan, and others that already had a lot of experience chasing Pablo Escobar and his henchmen all over the country. They were under the supervision of General Rosso Jose Serrano, which awarded you one of your condecorations. In one of your photos, I saw him.
Yeah, correct. So Hugo Martinez wasn't involved with the Cali hunt. He was one of the key players, obviously, in the hunt for Pablo Escobar and the Bloque de Búsqueda in Medellin. The other individual you referred to by the name, his name was Carlos Barragan. He was a lieutenant colonel that was in charge of a special vetted unit that worked with the intelligence community. By that, I mean with the CIA. And it was through his men that we did a lot of very, very sensitive operations. We were able to actually apprehend Gilberto Rodríguez Orejuela in June of 1995 based on working with that special unit, one of the SIU, Special Investigative Units, led by Colonel Barragan.
In your assessment, what distinguished the Cali Cartel organization in operations and how they were able to obtain the control of almost 85% of the global cocaine market?
Well, one of the reasons is because of the corruption that they had. They were able to, and if you go back in history, they were able to corrupt to the highest levels of the Colombian government. They contributed anywhere from some estimates between $6 million and $10 million in the 1994 presidential campaign over Ernesto Samper. They had extremely high-level government officials just about in every location in the Colombian government, whether it was Congress, whether it was the Senate, whether it was judges, prosecutors, police, military, everybody. That's how they differed from the Medellin cartel, because the Medellin cartel and Pablo Escobar, they ruled through violence, threats, intimidations, murder, kidnappings, whereas the Cali cartel, their weapon of choice was to bribe, right? Far better to buy people in positions of power and importance to be able to help facilitate their cocaine trafficking. And they were able to establish, front companies, legitimate businesses in many, many countries throughout the world, all through Central and South America. They had major distribution points in just about every major U.S. city in the United States, from Los Angeles, San Diego, Houston, Dallas, Miami, all the way up the East Coast into Canada. And because of that, they were able to control at their height 80 to 85% of the cocaine that reached U.S. soil and 90% worldwide. They were dominating the cocaine trade on 6 continents, and if Antarctica had a cocaine problem, it would have been 7. And because of that, they were earning billions and billions and billions of dollars every year, which they were able to put back into that very sophisticated cocaine smuggling organization that they had. They were able to bribe and control large portions of the Colombian government, and they had an extensive money laundering apparatus through various countries, not only in Central and South America, but as well as Europe. So when you combined all of those things that the Cali cartel did, they were just a massive, very successful drug trafficking organization.
The question comes to mind is the following. Just like with all of the money that supposedly Pablo Escobar and the Medellin cartel made, the Cali cartel also made a lot of money. What happened to all of that?
Well, the Cali
here in midair.
Well, the Cali cartel, as well as Pablo, they made billions of dollars. Pablo buried a lot of his money. He spent it lavishly, whereas the Cali cartel invested a lot of their money, right? So during the 80s, if you go back in Cali, the Cali cartel was responsible for 40% of the economic development in the city of Cali during that time. They were buying real estate, they were building hotels, they were building shopping malls, they owned banks, they owned the Colombian soccer team, America de Cali. They owned all kind of different things, and they owned thousands of residences and properties themselves. The running joke back when we were working there was that Jose Santa Cruz owned over 2,000 properties when we were there, and we ended up seizing well over 1,500. The same with Pacho Herrera. So they invested a large part of their money. They had it in Swiss bank accounts. They had it in a variety of different locations.
In terms of violence, how did the Cali approach differ from the Medellin in more public brutality? Because, people, especially in New York, you saw the violence, but it got played out. Oh, that must have been the Medellin cartel. But a lot of the hits were also done by the Cali hitmen, people that didn't pay, people that stole from their caletas, that took their drugs, or that were informants.
It's correct. So initially, early on, when you go back in history with the Cali cartel in the 70s and 80s, when they were setting up shop in New York, yes, it was to control your territory and establish a domain and your reputation. There was a lot of violence. There were major shootouts in the city. But as Cali evolved, and especially down in Colombia, they shied away from the overt violence, right? Because they saw and they learned a great deal from Pablo Escobar and what was happening in the country at that time. Going back, you look at Pablo, he was assassinating government officials. He killed the Minister of Justice, Rodrigo Lara, in 1984. They assassinated Luis Carlos Galan, a presidential candidate in 1989. They had a part in, with the M19, attacking the Palace of Justice in Colombia. They blew up the DAS building, right? They blew up the Avianca flight. Remember, they blew up the Avianca flight, killed over 100 people. So the Medellin cartel was very overt with their violence through the threats and intimidations, where Cali didn't want that heat. They saw what happened to Pablo Escobar and some of the Medellin cartel members, right? They were hunted down. Pablo was shot on top of a rooftop by the Colombian National Police barefoot, right? He was hunted for years. The Cali cartel didn't want that, right? So if they had to eliminate somebody, they tried to do it quietly. Now, not to say that they didn't at times, have public displays of violence, but it was kind of rare. It's far better for them to have you disappear, William. So if I wanted you gone, I would probably, you weren't some very high-ranking member where your presence was going to be missed. You would be lured to a meeting, you would be killed, you would be thrown off the bridge into the water, or you would be buried somewhere in a remote location. So they tried to go about their level of violence very quietly.
Describe the main challenges of building trust within the multinational and multi-agency team. It is very hard to work in an atmosphere where, even though you have vetted units and units trained by the United States, that there is always this mythical, like ghost in the room, that maybe what you're saying is going to get back to the people in the cartels and probably compromise the investigation or your lives.
Well, it was definitely a learning experience, and it took us a while to figure out how to circumvent that, because when we started working in Cali, everything that we were doing was compromised, right? So it was like in some of the movies where you'd go in and you'd find a cup of coffee steaming, or a piece of toast that was half bitten into just sitting there, but there was nobody there, right? So it was very obvious to us that the operations that we were doing and the intelligence that we were passing was getting compromised. And in order to circumvent that level of corruption, we had to start working with these special, as you said, these vetted units that were assigned in Bogota, right? We couldn't even use forces or troops that were stationed in Cali because of the level of corruption that was there. And even when we were planning some of these operations, we were still doing a lot of the work unilaterally, right? We were doing our own surveillances. We were planning our own operations. We were reconning the areas and talking to informants. We were doing everything on our own. And then we would call in these specialized groups. And then even when we did that, we wouldn't give them all of the information as to what we were doing. We weren't telling them what the target was. We weren't telling them the location of the target. We were telling them to meet us off a road and to follow us, and that we would take them to the location. And just before we actually did the raid, we would tell them, okay, the target of this operation is Miguel Rodríguez Orejuela, and he is in this house over there. So even though we could trust Colonel Barragan's team as much as any other team in Colombia, and they proved to be highly trustworthy and reliable, we still a lot of times guarded some of that information just in case, to protect our sources and methods as well as our assets.
Describe a moment you realized just how high the stakes were for your task force work.
Well, I mean, it was even before we got there when we found out that the Cali cartel had contributed in upwards of $6 million to the presidential campaign of Ernesto Samper. And it was at that point we realized, look, the corruption goes all the way to the top of the Colombian government. And on some of the initial raids that we did one raid in Cali where, and this is documented. So a lot of times people say, like, I don't believe some of that stuff, or that seems too crazy to believe. This is all 100% documented. We found in one raid 3 little briefcases which contained, hundreds, if not thousands of pages of documents. And in some of those documents, we found a list. Now, this is on one raid, William. We found 2,800 names of corrupt officials in those documents on one raid. So that will tell you the extensiveness of the corruption that the Cali Cartel had, that they had, tens of almost, thousands of people on the payroll. So that's when we realized, look, this is going to be probably a little bit harder than we thought. And we really have to be careful and make sure that we're protecting everybody involved in these operations.
Was there anything in the psychology and management style that surprised you during your investigation when it came to the Rodríguez Orejuela brothers?
As far as what? What do you mean?
The way that they developed their leadership within the infrastructure of the Cali Cartel. Was there anything that really stood out that you said they're running this stuff like a corporation? This is not, they're not running this like a criminal enterprise.
Yeah, I would say their structure and the sophistication. And what do I mean by that? So the Cali Cartel, through the leadership of the Rodríguez Orejuelas and Jose Santa Cruz, they had the Cali Cartel broken down into 5 major divisions, right? So you would just pretend you're talking about like Xerox or General Electric or some of the biggest corporations in the US, a Fortune 500 company. So they had these divisions, right? They had the trafficking division, they had the financial division, they had the political division, they had the legal division, and the security division, or the military. So each division operated independently and without any of the other members in the other departments knowing. They were completely isolated. I'm trying to think of the word compartmentalized. They were completely compartmentalized. So if somebody got arrested in one of those divisions, they couldn't tell on another division. And just the same way that they had their money laundering apparatus and their drug trafficking organization set up in the United States. You take New York for example. They would have, we'll throw out a number, 25 different money laundering cells or 25 different drug trafficking cells. Each one of those cells had a cell head that reported to either a regional head or to Miguel Rodríguez back in Colombia. And everyone in the one division or that cell didn't know anything about any of the other cells. So if you took down one person in that cell, or you completely wiped out that one cell in New York, there were still 20 or 24 other ones still operating there that would be completely independent of that other one. So just the way that they were set up and they were run, it was almost like a terrorist organization, how compartmentalized and insular that they were. And it was literally run like a Fortune 500 company.
What was the most shocking revelations you discovered about their personal lives or business dealings?
The most shocking thing. Well, Pacho Herrera was openly gay. Back then, that was, as far in the drug trafficking world, that wasn't something that a lot of people talked about, but he embraced it. Everybody knew about it. He wasn't trying to hide it. That was a little surprising. And each of the leaders were different, but they were able to get along, right? That's why they were so successful for the several decades that they were operating in, is that they were able to get along. Gilberto was very smart. He was a long range, like a visionary, a business planner. They used to call him the chess player because he was always thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead, and how they evolved and started to set up their operations in Europe and expand that into Mexico and other areas of the world. If these guys really put their mind to it, they would have been very successful in the legitimate, business community. How they branched off into owning banks, Miguel was an attorney. He was very smart. He was very methodical on how he did things. These guys were not, compared to the North Valley cartel, these guys were very intelligent, pretty well educated, and again, probably would have been successful in anything else that they did other than the illegal activities that they were involved in.
They were very much concentrated on their family's welfare, meaning that their children went to the best schools, that they got high educations, and they didn't want them involved in the trade. They more or less tried to isolate. And I think the downfall of them, or how they finalized their lives and, went to jail, is trying to protect the rest of their family from not continue to be bothered by the authorities. Is that your take on that?
Yeah, I think you're right about that. They had large, especially the Rodríguez's, large extended families. Their kids went to very prestigious, some of them very prestigious universities in the United States. The other children there, again, were educated. They were several of them attorneys, very successful. They accumulated a lot of that money, and again, they bought real estate. They were kind of like planning for future generations almost with their families, that they were well taken care of. And with extended family of that size, they couldn't cooperate, or they couldn't do anything once they were arrested, for fear of retaliation against all of those family members. So you really don't see Gilberto or Miguel or anybody, when they got arrested, openly cooperating, for fear of that reprisal towards those family members, and protecting that extended family there in Colombia.
In your opinion, what is the moral cost of operating an environment with endemic corruption?
Well, corruption leads to everything. If you're able to corrupt people in key locations, and this is why the Cali Cartel was so successful, in key positions in the Colombian government or any other government, at the highest levels, and whether it's Congress, the Senate, being able to pass legislation that protects you, right? Being able to ban extradition from the Constitution, being able to rewrite like asset forfeiture and asset seizure laws. So if you're able to corrupt these individuals in the proper places, you can, and they did, pretty much control an entire country. So the systemic corruption is a very, very dangerous thing. I think we see that now in Venezuela as well. And it can lead these criminal organizations to gain such a powerful foothold. And you can also see it in Mexico as well, where these organizations are operating for, some of them for decades as well, where there doesn't seem to be any kind of military or police response going after them. So these organizations, they cannot exist without corruption. And if you notice, we have our problems here in the United States, obviously, but you don't see these types of cartels operating in the United States. You don't see these drug kingpins, having control over cocaine or heroin or methamphetamine for 10, 15, 20 years plus, because we don't have that level of corruption. And these organizations cannot exist if they don't have that level of corruption.
I always said, and when I teach, when I go overseas or wherever I am, that corruption cannot exist, or narcotic trafficking cannot exist unless it's politically protected. There is no way. And I observed that during the pandemic. During the pandemic, everything was closed, including the border. And the amount of drugs coming in were very little. As soon as the pandemic ended, it looks like they opened up a flood of drugs, like a river that came in. And the other thing is that with President Petro being the president of Colombia right now, he did some type of meeting with the former president, and they stopped monitoring satellite. They stopped monitoring the cultivation, the plantation areas, and therefore the amount of plantations grew almost 4 times more than with the heyday of the cartels, and now the production is at its highest. Different players, more drugs, more money. Do you see that maybe what the president is doing right now will have some effect in the fighting the cartels as terrorist organizations?
Okay, multi-pronged question. So if you look over the last, even say 3 years, the level of coca cultivation in Colombia has exploded, right? It has increased dramatically because of some of the things that you mentioned and others. So there is a lot more cocaine being produced right now, even more so than just a few years ago. That's number one. I think some of these kinetic strikes that have been conducted by the Trump administration on these Tren de Aragua, go fast boats coming out of Venezuela, it is sending a very strong message. But the one thing that I've learned throughout my career in law enforcement is that these drug trafficking organizations are very adaptable, right? And they adapt very, very quickly to changing environments. So just as you pointed out, the pandemic, there may be a few more of these strikes and a few more of these go fast boats blown up in the Caribbean Sea coming off the northern coast of Colombia, Venezuela. But I think what you're probably going to see is that they will slow that route down, and they will start sending more cocaine and more vessels, maybe not go fast vessels, but more fishing vessels coming off of the western coasts of Colombia and Ecuador out into the eastern Pacific and or up around the Galapagos Islands, which is a very well-known smuggling route, because that part of the East Pac, the Eastern Pacific Ocean, is much more expansive than the Caribbean Sea, and there are not as many U.S. surface assets in that area, obviously, because there's much more ground to cover. So I think you're going to start seeing a shift over to that Eastern Pacific side for these vessels. And again, that's how these organizations operate. They have to adjust to what law enforcement does, just as we have to adjust to what they do.
Was there ever a eureka moment or a breakthrough that changed the nature of your pursuit?
Against the Cali Cartel?
Yes.
Sure. I think that once we were able to make contact with Jorge Salcedo, who was the head of security for the Cali Cartel, we were able to get a lot of really good insight into what the Cali Cartel was doing, how they were operating, like very, very specific information, which allowed us to obviously apprehend Miguel Rodríguez. But the development of assets, human assets on the ground in Colombia at that time was one of probably the 2 or 3 most important things that allowed us to succeed. The other one being able to work unilaterally, to be, as we talked about earlier, to gather our own intelligence and plan our own operations. And the other one was being able to work with those vetted units. So those 3 things, I think, really, really were able to turn the tide for the U.S. as well as the Colombian government to actually bring down the leaders of the Cali Cartel.
Talking about informants, how important is good informant handling for new agents? It's something that I try to really, when I teach, I was able to go with a former agent, Dennis Fitzgerald, DEA. He's an attorney. He wrote the book about informant handling. It's the Bible of informant handling. Dennis Fitzgerald. And I also traveled with Mike Levine. We had a team about 4 people, and we traveled throughout Latin America, teaching undercover and informant handling. Um, how important do you think it is for new agents or even seasoned agents that uh, don't know how to handle informants?
It's very key. And, one of my first days on the job when I came on in Miami and back in 1988, I had one of the senior members in our group told us, he goes, "Hey, Chico, there's 3 things that'll get you in trouble with this job: drugs, money, and informants." And he was absolutely right. And yeah, you need to be, and some of those names that you mentioned there with Fitzgerald and Mike Levine, these guys have been around a long time and they really are experts in their field. If you're not careful in handling informants or dealing with informants, you're doing yourself a disservice and you're going to get yourself jammed up, because there are a lot of safeguards that DEA puts in place for handling and dealing with informants, but a lot of people choose to disregard those, right? You should always meet with 2 people. There's a lot of things that you need to corroborate and make sure that you're not getting yourself in a bind, verifying the information that you're getting. Um, there's a whole, we don't even have enough time to go through all of the regulations and rules that we have with dealing with informants. But yeah, if you're not careful, some of these guys are very professional. Uh, they're out there to make a buck. They're out there to try to get you in trouble as well. So you need to be very careful in dealing with informants. Absolutely.
Uh, were there moments when you felt the entire operation might collapse?
Oh, absolutely. And specifically, the one that comes to mind was we did a raid, the raid where we actually found the 2,800 names of corrupt officials. We were within probably seconds or a minute of arresting Miguel Rodríguez, who was hidden in a caleta in the bathroom. And we knew he was there. We had been in the apartment for 10 or 12 hours. We finally located him. And as we were literally knocking a wall down and drilling holes in the wall, the fiscal, the Colombian prosecutors came in and they shut the entire operation down. We were detained, arrested, however you want to describe that as. We had denuncias and formal complaints written up against us. And at that point in time, we suspected very highly that the cartel was on to Jorge Salcedo, the asset that we were using. And we were concerned and very worried that he was going to be killed. And at that point in time, we thought the entire operation was coming down, that Salcedo would be killed, that me and my partner Dave Mitchell were going to be kicked out of the country because of our being detained and arrested, and that this whole thing was going to end in a very, very bad way.
A lot of people don't understand that agents, whether FBI, DEA, ATF, or Homeland Security, HSI, former U.S. Customs, when you overseas, you don't have police powers. You are the bedding call of the host country. And it's not like you see in the movies, that, you're doing whatever you want overseas. I mean, there's a lot of rules. There's more don'ts than cans. There's more things that you cannot do than things that you could do. Can you explain a little bit about that? Because navigating that is a little bit frustrating also.
You're absolutely 100% correct. So as federal agents, especially with DEA, we do not have like unilateral arrest powers. So I cannot go out. If I saw Miguel Rodríguez walking down the street in Cali, I couldn't per se go up and physically arrest him and put handcuffs on him. We had to abide by the Mansfield Amendment, which basically prohibits, federal U.S. agents from participating in drug-related arrests overseas. So, 1, we had to abide by that. 2, we were told in no uncertain terms that we could not take any kind of unilateral action in Colombia. That meant, even surveillance or doing anything. But in order to do our jobs, we had to pretty much violate that mandate on a daily basis. And thirdly is that when you work in an overseas environment in the U.S. Embassy, you work for the ambassador, right? The ambassador is the king and he makes the rules. And if he is not happy with what you're doing, or you cause an incident which causes embarrassment to the U.S. government or violates some of those protocols or procedures that are put in place, he can send you home. They can PNG you, persona non grata, the next day, which has happened to many agents overseas. So you are really operating at the behest of the host nation there and by the rules and regulations set forth by the ambassador of that country that you're in.
Did you anticipate the emergence of successor organizations like the Norte Valle Cartel once the Godfathers were placed under U.S. custody?
Yes. You can see that developing, and this is something that our intelligence agencies, as well as intelligence analysts within DEA, we try to monitor, right? And this is a thing that I think you can learn not only in business but in other aspects of life, is that when you have a emerging problem, you need to deal with it as the problem arises and not kind of kick the can down the road. Because historically, you see that in a lot of these countries, especially in the drug world, is that, you know, while Medellin was so powerful, you saw in the background the Cali Cartel, and you knew that they were next, right? They were going to emerge after the Medellin cartel was taken down and be the next powerful cartel in Colombia. Same with the Norte Valle cartel, right? The North Valley cartel. We knew that the minute that the Cali cartel was taken down and dismantled, that the next enemy that we were going to face was the North Valley cartel. And then you saw it with the paramilitary organizations, right? The AUC, the United Self-Defense Forces of Colombia, and the FARC, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. So there are always these other organizations waiting in the wings to prop up and be the next powerful cartel. So that's why you need to try to have a strategy in place to deal with these cartels as they're coming up, so that they don't become that powerful. And you know, a lot of times we don't have the resources or the manpower to deal with all of these emerging problems at one time, especially in Colombia. So you kind of take what you can, you do the best job that you can against this cartel, and then you kind of wait till the next one comes up and then try to take it down. So yeah, we knew that the North Valley cartel was lying in the wings, just waiting to take over. And if you look back too, right, the North Valley cartel played a major part in the killing of Jose Santa Cruz, Chepi Santa Cruz. They killed Pacho Herrera in prison in November of 1998. They tried to assassinate Miguel Rodríguez's son, William Rodríguez. He was shot 8 times outside of a restaurant. So, yeah, they were just waiting in the wings trying to take over.
Yeah, because there was a war waged. A war was going on between the faction of Varela and
Diego Montoya.
Diego Montoya, and it was an all-out war. I mean, there were big enemies. I mean, when Varela got killed in Mérida in Venezuela, he got killed by 2 of his lieutenants. It wasn't like it was his own people that killed him. And for a long time, you know, the Chavez regime didn't want to produce any evidence that it was him. I think at the end they decided to give some DNA or something, but they never returned the body back to Colombia.
Of Varela, you mean?
Oh, Varela, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we were able to get photographs of the crime scene as well as him, and I mean, there was no doubt it was him. You know, he was shot. He had 1 shot right in the forehead. So, and we knew that our intelligence indicated that Varela was in Venezuela for quite some time. But yeah, the war between Diego Montoya and Varela claimed, you know, thousands of lives. It was very bloody. It went on for several years, and it really caused a major fracture of the North Valley Cartel.
You had a very important player at the port in Buenaventura, Jorge Eliezer El Negro Asprilla, that ran the port like if he was his own private company. He had, Colombian customs officials. He had the captains of the ships, the merchant marines of the ships, and everybody almost fixing their payroll. And they helped. First, he helped the Cali Cartel, and then he went to work for the Norte del Valle Cartel until his demise. I think he did 16 years in U.S. prisons. He's back home, free.
Yeah, Buenaventura has always been a very strategic point for the exportation of cocaine. There had been two kings of the port of Buenaventura, Victor Patiño and Asprilla. And they were able to, as you said, infiltrate that port. They were able to control those areas in and around Buenaventura to get the cocaine to there. They were able to load it onto those containers and send, massive quantities of cocaine from that port into Mexico and even into Europe. So yeah, those two guys were very, very major players, very well known for their control of the port of Buenaventura.
Were there particular moments where counter-narcotics and counter-terrorism efforts overlapped?
Counter-narcotics and terrorism?
And were there particular moments where counter-narcotic operations and counter-terrorism overlapped because of the players, the shifting in organizations?
Absolutely. And the two prime examples of that would be the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, the FARC, a left-wing Marxist-Leninist guerrilla group, as well as the Autodefensas Unidas de Colombia, the AUC, a right-wing paramilitary group. Both of them designated terrorist organizations, but both major narco-trafficking organizations. And during my time in Colombia, we were able to have significant investigations against both of them. We were able to indict many of the leaders of various FARC fronts, as well as the Estado Mayor of the AUC, the paramilitary group. And many of those people were extradited to the United States. Salvador Mancuso, to name one. There were many, many others that were extradited.
HH.
Yeah.
El Tuso, yeah.
Tuso, exactly. Sierra, exactly. There are many, many people. So that's a prime example where DEA would be investigating the narcotics side of a designated foreign terrorist organization.
How did narcotic trafficking reshape the conflict in Colombia in the border region? Especially now that you see this pact that the Maduro regime signed with President Petro, where they gave him almost carte blanche over the border, the very porous border of Colombia and Venezuela, where the Cartel de los Soles, working together with the new Marquetalia, the offshoot of the old FARC regime that still operated in the ELN, plus you have other groups like Tren de Aragua and other ones competing for control of some of those routes.
Well, the border between Colombia and Mexico, as you know, is very porous, especially along the Cucuta region. It's been known for many, many years that drug traffickers, and we talked about Varela, for example. There's been other examples of Colombian drug traffickers hiding and setting up bases of operation in Venezuela under the protection of not only the Maduro regime, but under Chavez as well. And it's very well known that the FARC and other left-wing guerrilla groups have basically migrated into Venezuela. They've set up shop there. They're working in conjunction with the Maduro administration as well as the Cartel de los Soles. They're also being given high-grade military weapons by the Venezuelan government so that they can continue to operate against the Colombian government. and they're also complicit in, sending, this is public information, sending, large cocaine loads from Venezuela into the United States. So the fact that that border is very porous, that the Venezuelan regime continues to support and openly back some of these groups is problematic.
Did you see evidence of direct collaboration or alliances between the armed groups and the cartels during your investigation?
Oh, absolutely. Looking back, the North Valley Cartel formed an alliance with the paramilitaries, which made them even more formidable of an opponent. You had Cuco Vanoy was indicted. He was a powerful paramilitary leader that was working in conjunction with some of these drug trafficking cartels. There's other examples of Carlos Castaño and some of the other major leadership members of the paramilitary groups working with the North Valley Cartel. They had a very close alliance. Some of the North Valley Cartel members were very close to the paramilitary organizations.
Yeah, some of the narcotic dealers from the Norte del Valle Cartel and other organizations bore a seat or bore paramilitary units, and they became leaders of those paramilitary units. And one is the Munera brothers, Los Mellizos.
Mm-hmm.
They one of them got killed in a Colombian raid, but the other brother was extradited to the United States. And you also had, out of the Medellin cartel, you had Don Berna of the Office of Envigado, which he also became a paramilitary leader.
Very, very, very powerful leader in the AUC or the paramilitaries. And, he was from that original clan of the Carlos Castaño, Fidel Castaño, Don Berna, that kind of formed the genesis of Los Pepes, and that evolved into the paramilitaries, and they formed, especially Castaño and others, a very close alliance with the North Valley Cartel.
Let's talk a little bit about ethics, legacy, and recognition. What does winning the DEA Administration Award of Honor meant to you personally after, so many years of putting your life at risk?
Well, it was an honor to receive it. I was very humbled, along with Dave Mitchell, Jerry Salme, and some of the other people that we worked with going after the Cali Cartel. It's nice when you receive recognition like that, but that's not why we do these jobs. That's not why I joined the DEA, and it's not why I wanted to go after the Cali Cartel, was for recognition. It was something that that I wanted to do. They were one of the biggest threats to the national security of the United States as well as Colombia. And, I think we do this job to try to make a difference. And while it's nice to receive that again and the accolades to go with it, it's not what we look for, and it's not why we do the job.
In retrospect, do you feel the sacrifice made with your family and loved ones were justified by the results?
Yeah, I would have to say so. Our mission, we were sent to Colombia to go after the Cali Cartel, to try to help bring them down in conjunction with the Colombian government. And that's what we did. And that was what we were going to do. And, I outlined that pretty well in the book, After Escobar, where we talk about bringing down the Cali Cartel. Is, me and my partner, Dave Mitchell, when we were there, and we were failing over and over and over again. All of our operations were being compromised. And, there was a lot of pressure on us, and us meaning the DEA, to have some results. And we basically made a vow at that point in time, and we basically said to ourselves, look, we are not leaving this country until all 4 of these Cali cartel leaders are arrested. And that was the commitment we made, and we were going to stay there as long as we had to, whether it was 1 year, 2 years, or 6 years, until that was done. So that's why we do the job.
What major policy changes would you advocate if you were in charge of the Drug Enforcement Administration in today's war on drugs?
Well, first of all, it's not a war. It never was. It wasn't even close to, because, and that would go to the second part of your question, is that we need a lot more resources than we have. We need a lot more manpower. We need a lot more money. We need a lot more prosecutors. We need to bring back very stiff or sentencing guidelines, so that people are not dealing in hundreds or thousands of pounds of cocaine or marijuana and getting very light 2 or 3 year terms or sentences. So I don't know if there is one thing or two things that I could do as being the administrator, but I think it's a whole policy, resources, and a whole combined effort by the U.S. government to really put the necessary resources in place to give us more of a fighting chance.
Now let's talk a little bit about your book. How can people get your book, After Escobar? I know it's all over the internet. Where can they buy it?
So the book, After Escobar, Taking Down the Notorious Godfathers and the Biggest Drug Cartel in History, dealing with the Cali Cartel. It's available on Amazon. It's available at Barnes & Noble. We have a website, www.afterescobar.com, where you can purchase it. And if you're really, if you're a fan of narcos and you're a fan of the Colombian cartels, the DEA investigations, I think you would find the book very interesting, because we go into very extreme detail on what we did, how we did it, why we did it, and you're going to get into the nitty-gritty of details that were going on in Colombia, as well as the systemic corruption, the problems that we faced. So there's a great deal of information in there about going after these cartels and Colombia, the history of Colombia in and of itself.
How would you compare the two eras from an operational and cultural standpoint between the Pablo era, the Cali cartel, and today? How do you see it progressing? Is it getting worse? Are we making a dent on it?
Well, I think with as we talked about earlier, the increased cocaine cultivation and production in Colombia is making our job a lot more difficult. And I mean by our job, law enforcement. And not only that, is that we are having other threats now that we're having to deal with. Fentanyl is a major, major crisis, right? There was no fentanyl that was coming into the United States, or that we were dealing with back in the 80s and 90s. That is a game changer. I think you've seen, almost 100,000 people have died over the last couple of years, every year, because of fentanyl poisoning. These cartels are getting stronger. They're getting richer. They're more savvy with their technology. They're using encrypted apps now to communicate. They're laundering their money now in Bitcoin. These are things that we didn't have to really deal with back when I was working. So I think it's making law enforcement much more challenging, and it will continue to be as long as there is. And the other problem too that we didn't talk about is the demand, right? The demand for drugs in the United States as well as Europe has just increased exponentially over the last several years. And it's the law of supply and demand. Without demand, you wouldn't have the amount of drugs coming into the country. So it's a multifaceted problem that I don't think we're going to resolve anytime soon, to be honest with you.
Are there any plans for you to write another book, or are you going to continue producing and doing other true stories like Narcos and things like that?
It's a great question, and we're actually working on a project right now, another documentary, which I can't get into, but I think if it ever comes to light, it would be pretty interesting. I'm also just started another book. I don't know where it's going to go or how long it's going to take, but it's going to be about the North Valley Cartel and the operations that we did to help bring them down. That is a much more complicated issue. You have a lot more people involved in the leadership of the North Valley Cartel. So that's something that we're working on, and we'll see how it goes. But that is the plan as of this point in time.
I really appreciate your time. I hope this is not the last time you accept my invitation to my program, Equalizer. It's been very fulfilling speaking to you, and a great honor to have had you here in my program.
Thank you, William. Big fan of the show. I'm happy to come back on anytime, and I appreciate your time today. Thank you for a very good conversation.
This concludes today's episode of Equalizer. My name is William Acosta. I'd like to thank Chris for sharing his incredible journey. Your honesty, insight, and perspective have brought these stories to life in a way that only someone who lived them can. To all of our listeners out there, thanks for joining us and for this deep dive into history and human resilience. And a huge thanks to our producer, whose dedication makes every episode of Equalizer possible. If you like this episode, please give us a like and share our links that are out posted in the screen with your family and friends. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and keep challenging what you think you know. God bless.